So today we're gonna make a bottlenecked vase, a piece that I'm starting with 2.5 pounds here. And just like any other shape, I'm gonna just work on getting it centered first. And then we'll talk about how to get a shape that's more taller than wide, and then closing off the rim. As always, I'm building up the clay, pushing from the sides, through my hands, towards the top, starting from the lower, into the middle of my hands, and then in the top. So if you watch that again as I move it, it sort of happens quickly and one after another, but pushing low, in the middle, and then on top. Pushing back down, using one hand on the top, supporting it with my outside hand, really forcing it centered with my outside hand across the wheel. When I'm letting go gently. If I let go quickly, by coming back down and then pushing with the amount of pressure I need, and then let go fast, you can see very quickly it's shifting back and forth. Pushing again, across and down, gently letting go. I've got a perfectly centered ball of clay. I'm keeping this outside edge nice and clean, nice and straight. I'm gonna put a hole in the top. My top hand rests across the center here, and I'm putting my right finger, or two, up against. My thumb is actually keeping them centered, so my thumb is what's in charge of keeping that nice and even. Gauging the depth of this hole by checking the thickness in here versus checking the thickness down here. I could stop it and check it with a needle tool, but visually I can compare. I'm looking for a thin bottom. I'm not going to be trimming this, so I want it to be nice and clean, nice and flat, and I'm stretching it out to the width that I want. This is when I'm establishing my width. I'm going to take a sponge. I'm going to compress that bottom, make it nice and flat, so there's no cracks, no chance for any inconsistencies. And this is the point where I'm establishing my 90-degree angle at the very bottom. When I build this up for the first time, I want my outside hand to really be dominant. I want my inside hand or inside wall to stay right along this line, but I don't want my outside wall to get any wider. So I want to bring this in and up at the same time, allowing my outside hand to be a little bit more dominant as it moves towards the top. Gently letting go once I get to the top, going back in there. I nicked it there with my left hand. Going back in, my outside hand once again is very dominant as I'm pushing towards the top. When I get to the top, gently letting go. Each time I'm feeling for the thicker parts of the walls, maybe pushing a little bit less as the walls start to get thinner. And then as I get towards the top, I'm not squeezing at all and keeping that rim nice and compressed. With a shape like this, I want to make sure that the very bottom of my cylinder is nice and straight, or even inward, because I'm going to want to have that finished either straight or tucked underneath. So I don't want it to flare out before I even start to shape. Each time I'm coming back to that rim, making sure it's nice and strong, keeping that compression with a little bit of pinching and pressing at the same time. One more time, really checking for the thickness. Squeezed a little bit there as I'm coming up the walls. I'm not putting a lot of pressure because I'm happy with the wall thickness. Slowly working my way up. And I have a nice straight cylinder, so it doesn't change shape. This gives me the opportunity to go in any direction. If I want this to be wider, I could go wider. If I want it to be narrower, I could go narrower. If I start with a shape that comes out from the bottom the entire way up, it's a lot harder to bring that back towards the center. So anytime you're trying to make something enclosed or something with a narrow neck, you want to make sure that it stays perfectly straight, or even as an inward cylinder. When I start to shape this, I'm actually going to start at the very top. So I'm going to direct where I want this rim to go first. So I want this rim to be curved in because I'm going to have it flaring. It's like a bottleneck. So I'm going to actually start with my rim, and I'm going to sort of create a triangle with my fingers and close that at the very top. What I'm telling it to do is I'm telling it to start to go in that inward direction. Once I close the very rim, I'm going to go to the shoulder of the piece and push in from the shoulder. You're going to notice that each time you start to bring this clay in, and I have two hands on the outside closing, I'm going to have an uneven rim. The rim is going to wobble a little bit because I'm taking that stretched clay and I'm recompressing it towards the center. And it's not going to go back centered, so each time I need to go back in, even this out a little bit, and thin it, because as I'm closing it, I'm also making those walls thicker. So each time going to the shoulder, closing that shoulder a little bit, bringing my fingers in towards the top. Once I gently let go, reaching back inside, lining, so my fingertip on my left hand and my fingertip with my right hand are meeting up. My thumb here is actually just locked into my finger, helps keep them together at the same time so they both move equally. And then I'll go in towards the center. And I'll take my needle tool and trim off some of that unevenness at the top, which will also help me thin this out a little bit. Reaching back in as far as I can one more time to get that curve that I want in the bottleneck. And then my last step will be to take my metal rib, run this up the side of the wall, a nice smooth surface. And I'm going to use the flexibility of the rib to curve. I'm going to give it a little support on the inside because I will be putting a little bit of pressure from the outside. Flipping the rib to the curved side. Really cleaning up that shape. My last two steps will be to take a small undercut, using the edge of the undercutting tool to get underneath that, just so I have a nice little shadow created at the very bottom of the piece so it doesn't flare out. Also will clean up nicer when I cut this off the wheel. And then there you have a bottleneck vase, 2.5 pounds, end up being about almost 8 inches tall.